You are listening to Storymakers, the podcast for women who are ready to step into their true identity, live with meaningful purpose, find belonging and connection, grow in leadership, and walk boldly in faith. Here you can uncover the story that you were created to live because you were made for such a time as this. Today I have an exciting guest for you. Her name is Blythe Daniel, and she's a literary agent I met after the Proverbs 31 She Speaks conference in 2024. We connected, and she's also an author and a marketer. She has worked for HarperCollins and spent 20 years as a literary agent. She's got her own agency, and she's also co-authored books with both her mother and her daughter, which is pretty awesome. I wish that's something I could say I had written a book with my mom before she passed, and maybe in the future there's a book out there to write with one or all of my girls. It's very inspiring to see somebody stretching the generations and the wisdom and the experience and connection that generations could bring together into a book and to the written word so that it could be, spread throughout other people's generations. It's powerful. She's got 3 teens. She lives in Colorado with her husband, and she has a really powerful ministry in the marketplace in what she does. And I love her heart. She's just a really compassionate, authentic, sweet woman, but she's super powerful. You can tell she's a powerful, confident woman of God, and she's walking in it, So I'm excited for you to listen in and see what is possible. She's got some really encouraging words for you, just right where you are in your story right now, and how every story is made for connection. Every heart is made for relationship. So listen in and enjoy. All right. Thanks, Blythe, for coming on. I'm super excited to have you talk with us today about stepping into your identity, purpose, belonging, and then you are also in a place of leadership in your own life with your own literary agency that I think is amazing. And so proud of the work that you're doing. And also you're an author and you've done so much with the generations that have come before you and after. And I want to hear about all of that because I think that the women listening will be inspired by the work that you do. And tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today, doing what you're doing, and your family, all the things that really matter to you, and what's in the heart of Blythe Daniels.
Thanks, Laura. I'm so excited to join you for this conversation. And as I've told you before, that relationships matter so much to me. I remember being a senior in high school, and I had an experience where I got to go and be on a radio show for a program that our school was doing. And I loved it. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to go into communications. And so I pursued a degree in mass communications, so both broadcasting as well as journalism. And then that led me to Nashville, where I worked for a radio station for a few years and then started freelance writing. I tell you, those paychecks were pretty bare.
Wow.
But I loved what I was doing, and I knew that God had called me to the arena of being in the media and being somebody that could help, hopefully, put into words who God has called us to be as Christians. Put into words, maybe it was a music review or a book review or interviewing different authors and Christian musicians to be able to talk about the power of God and to be able to, share who He is to the rest of the world. And so that's really from age 18 on has just been a ministry calling of being able to help amplify other people's messages. And then, as you mentioned, an author as well. God, allowed my mom and I, and my mom and my son and I, and my daughter and I to write books together that we didn't seek out. And I think that was important for me to know that God can bring something to me without me having to strive for it or go seek it and compromise, family time or compromise what God's called us to do by going after something. And, God does work in miraculous ways, doesn't He? He brings opportunities. Yeah. And we have to be available, and we have to be ready, and we have to do certain steps to lean in. But that's really what's on my heart, is just being able to help people with the messages that God's put on their hearts. As a literary agent, I'm helping them get their books published and out there into the world. And then as an author, as God brings ideas, um, hopefully we're diligent and we're obedient to act on those ideas and do what He's called us to do in the writing sphere. But most of all, I am a wife and a mom. I have 3 teenagers, twins that are 15, a boy and a girl, and then a 17-year-old daughter. And we're in some days of challenges with, the next stages of their lives and the pressures that they feel at school. And so we're working through those things as a family. And I know that those of you who are listening are also maybe in a season where you're needing to press in to your family or pressing in to hear what God's saying to you in a season of hardship. And we certainly have walked those and even now we're walking through just some steps of with one of our children of really having to help them deal with the stressors of life. And so we never want to put a ministry or a calling before our family, do we? But God gives us those opportunities, and we balance that with the calling of family. Whether you're single and you have your family of origin, or whether you're married and have your husband and or children. So that's just kind of in a nutshell who I am and what I'm passionate about.
I love that. Just what you said, my internal summary was that you have a passion to put into words. And that means maybe you're putting it into words, but maybe you're helping other people put into words who God is, who He says we are, and what He's doing on the earth, like whatever that looks like. And I think what an honor that is to be able to put that to words, to make it consumable to the world as a whole, to know more about who He is and who He says we are, I mean, I don't know if I would have the depth of understanding and revelation about identity, purpose, belonging, leadership, faith, if somebody like you hadn't done the work to help put it into words so I could read them. So,
I think there is a special place, isn't there? Beyond what we learn in Scripture, there is a special place of being able to learn from other people and read books and write books or write podcast content or articles or whatever it is, where write curriculums, because God has given each one of us something on the inside of us to fulfill. And I really do believe that all of our callings are going to look different. And some of those callings come about sooner. I know people that became authors at like 20 years old or younger. And for me, it was much later. And so we know that God's called us to something, and seeking that and being willing to step into those hard places. I will tell you that just even in the seasons of writing books, we know that there's an enemy that wants to bring accusation and distraction, and those are some of the most intense moments when you're stepping into your purpose and your calling and really living out your identity, where the enemy will whisper things to you or cause situations to come up in your family that you need to deal with. And it can seem like a derailing. It can seem like, gosh, this isn't what all I thought this year would look like. And yet those are the seasons in which we really grow the most. In a recent season of just really pressing into the Lord and just asking Him for His mercy and asking Him to guide us in a hard place that we've been walking in, I have felt like the presence of God that I haven't felt when I've just done your daily Bible reading and you pray maybe once a day. And so I can honestly say that, as we are women who are creating some type of creation, whether it's books or content or ministries or something in our community or our neighborhoods, and we're really into what we sense that we're supposed to be a part of, there can be that tension of like, gosh, I feel so alone right now, or I feel like this isn't even worth it, or how am I going to deal with the struggle that I didn't expect to see? And I think that's when we really are able to see God move so miraculously in our lives and our families. And it's hard, isn't it? It's hard when we go through those moments in those years or seasons, but that's where I see God do the greatest work in my heart. And I need to be reminded of that. I need to be reminded that even in the hard places that we go through, that, God's doing a work in us, and we don't want to sidetrack that. We don't want to miss that. And that's my prayer too, is that I don't miss something that God's impressing upon me or calling me to do, that I'm not too focused on my agenda that I'm not spending the time with him and I'm not praising him and worshiping him as I should. So I think that's maybe a struggle for a lot of us women because we are busy, right?
Right. And that's actually, you were starting to answer one of my questions was like, what do you say to the women who are in resistance and feel like there's been a derailing? Like, what's the encouragement, the hope to move through it, to press on and be enduring, walk in faith, Sounds like you have been experiencing that and learning it yourself.
I actually have. I really have. And, you know, with what we've been walking through as a family, with one of our family members having some struggles, it was something that I didn't feel prepared to handle. We never do, right? But it actually, one of the things that we've been walking through and just trying to learn how to create better rhythms as a family and not be overwhelmed and not let the pressures of life take on, and dealing with the things that come up in our thoughts when that does happen. It's almost like everything else gets put on hold. And sometimes that feels like, oh man, I didn't expect that to happen, or I can't focus on this project because I'm really focused on my family right now. And, we don't know how long those seasons are going to last, right? But God does, and He will use them. Like one of the things that our family member has said is that I know that God must have something really important for me, and I'm not going to let Satan get this victory, and I'm not going to take what he's trying to put in my mind. And so I think that it's so important for us to just remember that sometimes those delays or derailing, it can feel like that, but it can be purposeful and intentional and a growing time for you. And, I do love the scriptures that talk about how God does have a plan and a purpose for us. And I also look at his timing and in Ecclesiastes when it talks about a time for weeping and a time for joy. And if we look throughout scriptures, there's so many times where we see that God is not delayed. He is aware of us and aware of what we're going through. And I do believe that he'll show us how it will be used and he'll restore. I also love the verse that talks about how we pray for God to restore what the locusts have eaten. And so sometimes what that feels like is time. That time is escaped from us, that we didn't plan on that time, that we would be needing to derail our attention or work on something else. And yet, God is a God of redemption, right? God is a God of restoration. And another favorite verse is in Isaiah, both Isaiah 58:12 and Isaiah 61:4, where as the Israelites were really going through a lot in those, I mean, they had walls that were falling down. They had families that were falling apart. I mean, their own spirituality was in question. And I love that in those verses in Isaiah that talks about God being a restorer of the breach, and that the descendants, that he is able to not just restore us but the generations. And so sometimes I remember that sometimes some of the things that we get that come to us are maybe generational. We've inherited some things, and so we have to deal with those things. Sometimes they're not, but that God is able to not just repair and restore us, but the generations behind us or in front of us. And so, yeah, back to just the thought of like derailing and how God, just to encourage women to just keep your eyes focused on the Lord and seek Him first. That's what I've been impressed upon, that someone has shared with me, like seek His kingdom, seek Him first, and all these things will be added. And so, yeah, just really pressing in and just to be encouraged that God has not forgotten us. He is so with us. And so that's what I would say.
Mm. Well, I don't think that any of those things could be said too many times. God has not forgotten you, It's I think just something that our soul needs, a constant reminder, and we have to take responsibility to get it, because somebody's not going to call us every day and remind us. It's like we have to do the renewing of our mind and put on the armor. And I like to put little post-it notes of, I need to remember this. Nobody else is going to call and remind me of this. So I better put a sticky note somewhere if this is something I want to take root in my in my paradigm, if I want to change my belief system or change the patterns and results that I'm getting in my life, like I have to take responsibility to shift that myself. And so even just sticky notes of keep your eyes on the Lord and seek him first, and God has not forgotten you. Things like that are so powerful to shift. And when they shift in your life, you do shift them for the generations to come. And so tell me a little bit about the work you've been doing with generations. You wrote a book with your mom and then with your children. So what's that been like? And I would love to know a little bit. I'm trying to imagine me writing a book with my mom, and she's gone on to be with the Lord Jesus now. And so maybe she and I could write a book if we were in heaven together, but on earth, I don't know how well it would have gone. So,
People have asked us that question, like, how did that go? Especially because we're sharing pretty openly. I mean, not pretty, but openly and honestly from our lives and our relationship together. And what I can say is that, when we came together to write the book, she had actually, when we first started writing the book, she had just been diagnosed with cancer. And so we started writing it in between her chemo treatments. And then it was a lot of her sharing ideas and me typing it into the computer. And we went back and forth, and we were just in this stage of like being very honest and real and open with each other and with God. And it was a really neat experience that I know I will always remember. And I'm so grateful that we were able to share both from her life with her mom, who was an alcoholic and very angry, and the dysfunction that she grew up in, and then how she became a Christian when I was born, and how the Lord really changed the trajectory of our family through my mom really learning how to press in and read the Bible, and just declare healthy words over our family and over us.
yeah.
And so turning things around from what she had experienced. And so then, as a daughter, both how did I interact with her growing up? How did I perceive her, and mistakes that I made, and there's things that we talk about that she did that she didn't love about what she did. And so, and then I reflect on how I also talked about how I've been learning as a mom with my two daughters and a son. And was so grateful that the idea came to us before even a publisher was looking for something on how to repair relationships, because we certainly had been through that in our family, and we still to this day we try to maintain open communication with each other. And we have wording in our book that can invite mothers to go to the daughter or the daughter to go to the mother and try and repair your relationship, because it's so important that we do everything that we can to be the one that's initiating restoration. And God really is so clear about relationships and friendships, and how it is the ability to love each other the way that Jesus loves us. It's so important. And forgiveness is also in there. Even if the other person is 90% wrong and you're only the 10%, but being able to initiate forgiveness, boy, it's so hard. But we really, I think in the book, Mended, Restoring the Hearts of Mothers and Daughters, our whole heart is really just being able to be in a humble posture towards the other person, to invite conversation. We can't change someone, and we know that, but we can initiate conversations to try to restore and repair, and really ask the Lord to be in those relationships and to give us the tools. And then the outcome belongs to the Lord, but we do our part. And so that's a big part of that message. And we followed up that book with a book called I Love You, Mom, which is a devotional for moms that has word gifts in it. So we just are affirming the mom for who she is. You are a legacy builder. You are joy. You just there's different adjectives that would describe a mom, because we feel like it's important for moms to know what a great job they're doing. Even though we all have our days when we feel like we're failing or not doing things as we want to, but it's important. Affirmation goes a long way for moms and daughters. And then finally, my daughter, who was 13 at the time that she wrote this book called Let's Be Friends, and I joined her in that project. And she had experienced some friendship issues in elementary school, and she wanted to encourage other girls that they are dearly loved by God, and that God has good friendships for them, and that you don't have to settle for the girls that are mean-spirited or, in her eyes, like gossiping. And how do you deal with those girls when it does come up? How do you walk away from a friendship? How do you treat people with respect, and also treat people well without having to take some of the things that they say to you? So it's kind of, a way of just affirming the girl, who she is as a daughter of God, but also how do you find friends that God has for you, and how do you have a good relationship with Christ as well? And so we've enjoyed really being able to share together, how important those friendships are in those early days of really even moving into junior high and high school, that the foundations of the people that we are around really do affect our character and really do either pull us closer to God or further away. But again,
Right.
basis of the friendships and relationships are so critical for young women and older women today.
It sounds like you have a foundation between 3 generations of taking personal responsibility and being the one who grows into the emotional maturity enough to become the person who is, like you said, being humble enough to invite the conversation and initiate forgiveness, whether it's with your mom or your a parent, a child, a sibling, or friends and schoolmates or coworkers. Like it's a solid skill set they don't teach in high school. Become like it forgiveness initiation 101 is not a class they offer and probably should. So instead, we could just refer them to your books. Go read this. You didn't get that class, go read this book. Because I think it's a really hard thing to do, especially with parents where you have so many wounds from childhood, and some of them are real, but many of them might have been perceived. And when you can just open up that conversation and find out that your childhood perception and interpretation of a situation was not your parents' intention, or it might not in fact even be what happened, but that's how you perceived it. And I can only imagine the depth of forgiveness and connection and restoration that happens when you are able to dive into honest confession about, I believe this, I feel this, and it's keeping us disconnected. What can we do about it? But wow, that's like a lot of bravery required to become the person who does that, especially if the other person is not interested. So
Right.
do you think there's, have you had feedback, or have you talked with women who say like, my mom's not interested, I tried?
I do. We've had conversations about that. And my mom, she became a counselor really as a result of what she went through as a young girl and even as a young mom. And it led her to find ways to address what was happening in her relationship with her mom. And so one of the things that my mom has shared was when people will say, my mom or my daughter's just not interested, our communication's broken, what she'll typically say is, well, it's our job to initiate, and we can't expect them to return, but we know that we are doing everything that we can. And she it's almost like the verse that you mentioned earlier about putting on the armor of God, where all the different armor is listed, and then it says at the end of that verse, and then having done everything to stand. And so we see that as the way that sometimes people won't respond right away, or they'll respond negatively. And that's when we get to pray harder or
Get
pray
to
more, I should
stand.
say. Yeah, and to
Yeah.
stand and to know that we're doing the right thing by initiating love. It's not a blaming. It's definitely
Yeah.
one of the questions that we use a lot of times is, just acknowledging, saying, I know that our relationship is not where it could be. What do you think we need to do to make things better? So it's opening the door for the other person
Hmm.
to give feedback, to say, well, you did this wrong, or you did, or I would want to see you do this. And so it's really giving the other person, it's a gracious invitation to give the other person a chance to respond. And sometimes if they don't respond right away, we suggest, sending a letter or sending a video or just some way of you expressing your heart, because sometimes they're so shocked that we are going to want to have a conversation that they can't receive it. And so given some
I can
time,
only imagine.
right. So given some time, they may come back. But, we are called to ask for forgiveness, whether or not someone else chooses to accept it. And, sometimes the harder part of that is to initiate saying to someone, I choose to forgive you for when I felt fill in the blank, or for when
Mhm.
this happened, and I choose to forgive you. And it is releasing that person unto the Lord. It's not saying that it didn't happen. In fact, it is saying that this is what happened, but I choose to forgive you. And the weight that comes off of us in holding on to that unforgiveness, it is an incredible gift to ourselves and to the other person. And so, yeah, I think that if there's some pushback, we want to pray for that person. We want to even get other people that we're close to pray with us. And we've seen hearts move. We're good friends with a family that the mothers and the daughters were not having conversations. And there's a lot more to the story, but basically now their families are seeing each other regularly. And the mothers and the daughters are talking again. And it wasn't an overnight success, but they spent time working through it, and now they have a relationship again. So it definitely can happen, but sometimes we just aren't as patient as we necessarily need to be, and that's something that I have to, work on patience even with my kids when I want them to respond a certain way, or we don't want to give up too soon.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been doing a lot of your own personal work as you have taken that journey to help support other people in helping them to be encouraged, but also educated, like how to, because so many people don't know how to start these conversations with moms or daughters or friends and do it. Like, how do I start? I don't even know what to do. I don't know what to say. I'm already afraid of rejection, and I haven't even gotten in front of them yet. There's a lot and I'm imagining that has taken you on a long personal journey, probably with some trials and pain, but also some healing and growth as the Lord he won't waste anything that we do, right? So
That's
he's like,
right.
great, as you give this away to other people, let me reveal it in you. Yay.
It's
So
interesting, as I do see people who come across my path who want to write a book, and they'll start to write on it, and then the very thing that they write about they're experiencing, or they just experienced it before they started writing the book. And it's amazing how God can take us in our broken places and use that. And that's essentially what people relate to most, right? We don't want to read things by people whose lives look perfect and who seem like everything's put together and they never struggle. And so, sometimes that you asked about, or you talked about, like, how do I start something, a conversation with someone? And one of the things that I think has been so important in our family and with our friendships is just to be able to start right where the pain is. You don't have to dig back years and years and years and cover every single thing that's happened, but to say, I feel like I haven't been the kind of daughter that you wanted, and I feel like I maybe disappointed you, but I want to restore my relationship with you. Or if you're a young girl talking with a friend, we used to hang out together a lot more, but we don't really see each other anymore. Have I done something to hurt you?
mhm.
So, like, we are, we're really able to, I guess, just start with where things are and not have to go digging back to name every single thing that we felt offended by. And so that's what I would say is really helpful, is just to kind of recognize that this is where you are, and you don't have to try and go back and detail everything, because no one wants to hear everything that's
No.
ever happened between you, and but just be able to
No,
name,
please don't
what's
bring all those
happening.
things up.
Yeah, like just to be able to hear, like, what's happening with you where you are right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. Even just to have somebody say it's possible is inspiring, but also there's a lot of hope to know that somebody like you and your mom and your daughter have put to words, um, kind of a model of how to go about it. Again, because there's no class in school about how to approach conflict and how to be the person willing to go step into the fire first and not knowing will they
Yeah.
receive what you have to say. So um, I'm really interested in that. I also, it makes me think of Francine Rivers, the author that I know a lot of people have read her books over the years. One of my first as a believer, first Christian fiction. She had a couple of books called Her Mother's, I think it's Her Mother's Hope and Her Daughter's Dream. And it was so impacting, this series, to me, because it was about, I think it's 4 different generations of women. And what was interesting was that you're introduced to the first generation, this woman and her life, and you get to know her as a character and why she makes the decisions that she does, why she acts and says the way she does. And then she has a daughter, and you see the daughter grow in her perception and interpretation of her mother and of herself. And then she has a daughter. And you see the generations play out in how each one is interpreting the other person and their intentions through their own lens. And then you see the grandmother and the granddaughter connect in deeper ways than the grandmother and daughter ever did, or the daughter and the mother. Like that middle generation, that woman who, because she is so intertwined with both of them, it was the grandmother and the granddaughter that really ended up having the, quote, easiest relationship, because there was so much tension for the woman in the middle. But the healing and the forgiveness, and from reading the reader perspective, I'm like, oh, if I could just tell you she didn't mean it the way you took it. And I feel that way when I see other people in life, and I go, oh, I wish that I could tell you that didn't mean what you made it mean. Because if you believed what their heart wasn't towards you, or what God's heart is towards you, if you believed that, you would have healing. You would feel hope. But because your interpretation is that it's through the lens of rejection or judgment or trauma, you're seeing it and perceiving it this way, and it's actually breaking down your relationship. Instead of connecting you, it's disconnecting you. And that book series was the first time to be able to experience characters in the throes of that. It actually spoke to my relationship with my mom and my grandma. And my mom and I didn't have a good relationship. My mom and my grandmother didn't. But my grandmother was everything to me. And reading that book after I became a believer opened my eyes to the restoration that needed to happen in the generations. Because I have daughters, I don't want to pass that to.
Yeah.
And as beautiful as the book was, it did not tell me how to go about it for myself. So maybe your book, Mended, is the follow-up. And now we know how to apply this to our own lives. I'm all about a good how-to. And now how do I apply this to my life? Thank you for the example, but now what do I do? How do I make this an opportunity to have transformation and in my own life and in my relationships, and also have an encounter with the Lord about it?
Yeah.
So I think I love that your daughter ended up writing a book, and the generation, that legacy building on it. And what do you think? Do you think that she was inspired to write a book because she was inspired by seeing you and her grandmother in becoming authors and in the literary industry? Or was it more for her inspired by like, wow, I know I'm young, but I feel a calling on my life from the Lord?
I think it was maybe a little bit of the first of just being inspired because she saw me and my mom writing and putting words together, and she's a good writer. But I think a lot of it was just that she and I talked about what she had experienced and what she didn't want other girls to feel alone, or she didn't want other girls to feel what she felt. And so it was just sort of a sense of like, I can do this, and I can give hope to other girls and talk about it. about the aspects of friendships that sometimes are really hard to talk about. And coming from someone that's in the age group can talk about it more so than someone like me who's out of that age group, for sure. And I think that it was really out of that desire of like, I really want to help others, and I want other people to not have to go through what I went through. And so, you know, ages and stages can change, and girls sometimes don't have those friendship hangups until maybe junior high or high school. But we are seeing girls earlier, say, 8 years old, really have some challenges in their friendships.
Yeah.
And so it's never too early to start to prepare our hearts for what may come, even if, like, some people have read our book Mended who have young girls who don't, the girls aren't talking back to their mom so much yet, or they're not having some of the challenges, the communication breakdowns yet, but they want to make sure that they know what to do if it does happen. But I think most of the time people come to, like you were saying, that practical application. What do I do when I feel like our communication is not there? We don't have a relationship. And we guide people through conversation starters. And in our book Mended, we probably have over 40 of them where we give you different things that you can start the conversation with. And that's a jumping off point. And then some journaling and guidance through some tools that you can use in your quiet time, but also in your family, to kind of trace back to where things maybe got off the tracks, and then how can you bring that healthy resolution back into the picture so that, like, as you said earlier, it doesn't fall to the next generation. And I think it's so important for us to realize that we can be the difference makers. And a lot of times we don't have the tools. We don't know, because we're in it. We don't know, how to get out of it. Maybe some of us have had counseling, maybe some haven't, but there are so many things that we can do to heal our hurts. And that's the thing that I feel like we need to be remembering, is that whether or not a person comes closer to us or not, we get to go closer to the Lord. We get healing from Him. And that's the ultimate healing. We want to try and do what we can while on this earth to heal with other people, but it isn't always going to work out the way we hope. But we always get a healed heart when we approach God.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. So every woman out there has some kind of story to tell. And I know that you have done the work. You've gone through this journey of your own, stepping into your own, you've written books, you've started your own business. You've done a lot of things and pioneered a lot of ground, and even just pioneering some hard ground in a relationship with your mom, and doing things like that pioneering spirit of, nobody taught me how to do this, but I'm going to go plow the ground and figure out how to do it. You've done a lot of that. And so with all the women out there who go, I've never been taught how to do this, whatever this is in front of me, but it's attached to who I am, and it's part of my story. What would you say to them as they listen and they need the encouragement, the example, a model of stepping out, pioneering, doing the hard thing?
Mm-hmm.
So
it can feel scary to step out and do something, especially if you're the first person in your family who's ever done anything like this, or you have a dream and you're not sure that it can be even financed, or that it can be a possibility for you in this season of life. And I would encourage you, and I'm sure that you already have, those of you who are listening, really sought the Lord to ask, Holy Spirit, is this something that you're confirming in my heart, or is this my own idea, or is this your idea? Because I think we definitely do want to make sure that when we do pioneer something, we do move in that direction, that we know that we're going with God in that. And so I think that would be a good step to really continue to bathe everything in prayer, and meaning go to Him multiple times and consistently, and ask for clarification and direction and guidance. And then the second thing would be to not be anxious or fearful. Because again, the enemy wants to keep us from something that could be great for the kingdom of God, but we sometimes hold back in fear or anxiety, thinking, I can't do it. What if I fail? I don't know how to do that. And God will always provide people along your path. God provided people for me. I had no idea what I was doing when I first started. And God provided people for me that I would just sit down with and ask questions and learn. And so I think maybe you don't have the tools all right in front of you right now, but you probably know someone that you could ask, how did you get your start? And what would you suggest that I do? How can this become a reality for me? And so it's just being intentional to the resources around you. I really do believe that God puts us in community. And that's kind of back to the whole relationships aspect, that God brings people into our lives, that we sharpen each other and we spend time together. And those are the people that we're a lot of times meant to do life with, or to encourage us to the next step. And so I would also suggest like maybe making a list of the people in your circle that you know they have something that you're interested in, that they're doing something that you're interested in, and set up an appointment with them. Don't be afraid to ask. I love when people say, how did you get started? And what does that look like? And how do you get into the publishing business anyway? And people are always willing to share. I feel like most people are willing to share their story and inspire other people. And then the third thing would be to write out some goals and make a list of what it is that you would be interested in. I read a statistic, I think it was earlier this year, that said that, like, I think it was like a high statistic, like 80% of the goals that people have that they don't write down never happen. In other words, there is
Mhm.
something to writing down the goals and the list that you would like to pursue. And so, so making that a reality, putting it on paper and praying over that even, and be expectant of what God has for you. Because I've heard my pastor say something about, if you can't dream big enough, that God would have to do a miracle inside that dream, that you're not dreaming big enough. So in other
Yeah.
words, our dreams ought to be bigger, where God would take a miracle for them to happen. And God is able to do that. And that's when he steps in. And so sometimes we dream too small, I guess is my point there. But hopefully those are some things that can inspire people to really follow, their heart, but also what God's put inside of them as a passion. And that's what I try and help people look at, is what is your passion? What has God called you to be aware of and do in your life, that no one else is doing it the way you are doing it?
Mm. And that's so powerful to ask those questions, because I think there's probably not people in the average woman's life asking her,
Yeah.
what are you passionate about and what are you made to do that nobody else can do the way you do it? And the way I heard what you just said is maybe in a flow, a framework of that, put it on paper, which makes me think of Habakkuk 2, write the vision, make it plain so that he who reads it can run with it. And I think that when you put it on paper, it requires that you define it. You actually give language to the things floating around in your head. With you leave them in your head, they stay more ethereal. They never feel like they're possible. When you put it down, it forces you to give language to it. And I think that does change everything. But then go do some research, like ask people, ask the questions, set an appointment, invite somebody to coffee, say, I'd like to take you to lunch. I want to pick your brain about, how did you get here? What did you do? Show me what's possible. And I think too, just experiment, just show up and try. And like you said, maybe you're worried that there won't be finances for it. I think the majority of women that have kids or look and are trying to figure out, how do I do something I'm passionate about, probably are asking the question of, like, how do I find money to do it? Doesn't it take money to make money? And I think sometimes you just have to start small, and you just have to be faithful with taking the couple of steps. And you don't write a book by you just looking at the computer and it's manifested all perfectly. You have to write one word at a time, one line at a time, one page at a time, and it has to build. And I think that's the journey that we all have to go on, whether it's healing and restoration in relationships. You just have to put one foot in front of the other.
True.
And whether it's starting a business or a ministry, writing a book, or just taking action in any area of your life that you feel God calling you to it, it's really just starting to be faithful and giving some focus and intention. I think that the work that you do is really amazing. And I know that you're passionate about it. I think you're really good at what you do, just in our conversations and time together. So I really, I guess, respect and honor that you are walking in your identity and purpose, and you've found where that belongs, and you're being faithful to do what God has called you to do. So good job doing that. And thank you so much for being an example to the listeners of what's possible. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate your kind words and your graciousness. And I think that it's so important that the way that you're connecting with women gives them also an example of what you can do when you start having these conversations. And maybe that someone listening may even start their own podcast or do some coaching like you do, and just all the ways that you're trying to help women in their callings. And I think it's so important for women to step out and know that whatever life stage they're in, there's always something that we can do. Even if we can't go full force, there are still things that we can do, whatever stage that we're in. So thank you.
Yeah. And just to verify, I think that the website is connectingpartsandconversations.com.
That's right.
And I'll put that in the show notes along with links to the books that we've talked about. So thanks again for coming on, and maybe we'll see you again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. And to learn more about me, my work, and how we can connect, visit sterlingandstonementoring.com or check the show notes. And until next time, remember, all things are possible and figure-outable.